In the summer of 2014, or close to it, since the exact week does not survive in any log open to the public, a Swiss cave diver named Marius Frei finned into a submerged limestone tunnel behind a dock on Merritt's Mill Pond, outside Marianna, Florida, and dropped into a low, unmapped chamber 100 feet under the water. His light swept the floor and found glass, rusted metal, splintered wood, blackened by decades underwater. Ordinary trash, the kind you would find at the bottom of any forgotten ravine, except this ravine was solid rock, sealed under 100 feet of pond water and stone, in a place trash has no business being at all. What Frei did for a living outside the water is not part of the public record of the dive. What is recorded is that he had already spent years mapping Florida's cave systems before that day, enough of them that a new chamber was, for him, a Tuesday. He named it the trash room, because that is what a working cave diver does with an unexplained thing. He gives it a plain name and keeps moving. But plain names have a way of outliving the questions that produced them, and the question the trash room raised in 2014 has never been closed. Trash does not seep through 100 feet of limestone. It falls, straight down, the way anything falls when gravity is the only force acting on it. Which means that somewhere above that chamber, at some point in the past, there was an opening straight to the surface. Today, there is not. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Merritt's Mill Pond sits at the edge of Marianna, a small city in Jackson County, in the part of Florida everyone calls the Panhandle. Underneath the pond, and underneath the pastureland and the golf course beyond it, is one of the densest concentrations of freshwater cave systems in the United States. Divers count at least 8 separate spring-fed systems draining into this one pond alone, among them Jackson Blue Spring, the largest and most heavily explored cave in the region, and Twin Cave, a smaller system close enough to hole in the wall that some divers believe the two may eventually prove connected underground. The cave behind that dock is called Hole in the Wall. Divers have surveyed more than 4 miles of it, winding through darkness at depths of 40 to 100 feet, in water that stays near 68 degrees whether the season above is July or January. It formed the way every cave in this part of Florida formed, slightly acidic groundwater, moving for thousands of years through limestone laid down by an ocean that used to cover this coastline, dissolving the rock from the inside out until solid stone became a hollow network of tunnels, chimneys, and rooms. The entrance itself is easy to miss from the water. Paddling north from the Hunter Fish Camp boat launch, past cypress trees leaning out over the pond, the first dock that is not tied to the bank marks the spot. Behind it, about 5 feet below the surface, is an opening in the limestone bank, barely wide enough for a diver in full gear to fin through sideways. Nothing above the waterline announces what runs underneath it. No sign, no marker beyond the dock itself, which exists for boats, not tourists. 2 branches split from the entrance, about 80 feet in, at a narrow throat divers call the chimney. They are known as the upstream and downstream passages, though the names are misleading. Both are fed by spring water. The current from one simply overpowers the other for the first few hundred feet, so it feels like one side is draining into the other, when in fact neither one is doing what its name suggests. It is the kind of detail only divers who have spent real time in the system would know to correct, and it says something about how carefully this cave has been walked through by people willing to go slowly and get the small things right. The upstream branch leads divers past a wide gallery called Alford's Room, toward a junction known as the Century Tunnel T, a smaller passage roughly 100 feet deep that continues on toward the far end of the system. The downstream branch runs to a chamber called the Big E, 700 feet from the opening, and further on to a section named Consolation Corridor, which divers say stays clear no matter how bad visibility gets everywhere else in the cave. These are not names assigned by any agency. They are working names given by the divers who mapped each stretch, in the same plain, functional style Frei used when he found the trash. A cave gets named the way a country road gets named, by the people who actually drive it, one landmark at a time, long before anyone official writes it down. The animals down there confirm how long this system has been sealed away from daylight. Divers and paddlers have independently reported a species of blind salamander, pale as candle wax, and a blind crayfish the same color, both adapted so completely to permanent darkness that they carry no pigment and no working eyes. These are not creatures that wandered in recently and adapted on the fly. Losing eyesight and color takes generations measured in geological time, not decades. Their presence is a kind of instrument, confirming that whatever has lived in hole in the wall has lived there, cut off from the surface, for a very long time, which makes the trash in that one chamber even harder to explain quietly away. There is one more anomaly in the record, smaller than the trash but just as unexplained. Every winter, the water in hole in the wall turns milky and drops several degrees, a pattern none of the neighboring caves in Merritt's mill pond share. A golf course sits above part of the cave's mapped passages, and divers who have logged the seasonal change for years suspect a connection between what drains off the fairways above and what clouds the water below. No hydrologist has confirmed it. The cause remains, in the words used by the people who actually dive the system, a matter of interpretation rather than fact. It is a small thing next to a room full of unexplained trash, but it points at the same underlying truth. This cave is still, after 4 miles of survey and decades of study, more connected to the surface above it than anyone has fully mapped, in ways that show up as clouded water in January, and in ways that show up as broken glass 100 feet down. The exploration history of Hole in the Wall stretches back further than Frei's dive in 2014. Decades earlier, a cave diver named Sheck Exley, born in 1949 and working at the time as a mathematics teacher in Live Oak, Florida, pushed nearly 5,000 feet into the same system's upstream passage, at the edge of what the equipment and decompression science of his era could support, and left a champagne bottle at the point where he finally turned around. Exley had co-founded the cave diving section of the National Speleological Society in 1974, in direct response to a wave of untrained diver deaths in Florida's springs, and the safety standards he helped write are still the ones taught in certification courses today. That bottle is still there. Divers who make it that far still find it sitting in the sediment of a passage almost a mile from open water, a marker left by a man who would go on, in 1994, to die attempting to push past the safe limits of a different, far deeper sinkhole in Mexico. Exley kept meticulous logs throughout his diving life, and his penetration into Hole in the Wall exists in that record. What sat on the surface above the cave when he made that dive, and whether the opening that later fed the trash room was already gone by then, is not something his surviving logs answer. The trail resumes with Frei. After his 2014 exploration, a diver and author named Neto, who was in the process of documenting Florida's spring-fed caves for a book called The Hidden Rivers of Florida, went back into the passages Frei had opened and extended several of them further. One of his lines ran in the direction of a neighboring system called Indian Washtub. It stopped, by his own account, within about 200 feet of that system's known passages, close enough to suggest the two caves might be hydrologically connected, not close enough to prove it. A separate, low, narrow passage branching off toward the trash room itself was pushed more than 500 feet past where anyone had previously surveyed. A cartographer named Jason Richards folded these extensions into an updated map that placed the system's documented length above 4 miles, though even that map, by Neto's own account, does not capture everything that has since been explored. Every one of these figures, the 4 miles, the 200 feet short of Indian Washtub, the 500 feet of unexplored side passage, comes from divers who wrote their names on their surveys and published them for anyone to check. There is no gatekeeper standing between the public and this data. The gatekeeper, if there is one, is depth, cold, and the years of training it takes to go and verify any of it yourself. This is patient, credited, published work, done by people who put their names next to it in a book and on public maps. which makes the blank space around the trash room stand out even more. Florida's official geological record of its springs and caves, the Florida Geological Survey's Bulletin, was first compiled in the 1970s and was not substantially revised until 2016. It catalogues depths, flows, and passage lengths across the state's karst systems, but it was built for hydrology and water management, not for cataloguing what individual chambers happen to contain. A sinkhole that once existed on the surface above one specific chamber inside hole in the wall, small enough and old enough to have closed over before anyone thought to survey it from above, is exactly the kind of feature that record was never built to preserve. The gap is not proof of anything hidden. It is a hole in a document that was never asked the question. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. The organization Exley helped found is itself part of the institutional record. In 1974, the year the cave diving section was chartered, 26 divers died in Florida's caves and springs, most of them untrained, most of them following passages meant only for people who had spent years learning to read them. By the late 1980s, after a decade of certification standards, mandatory training, and posted warnings at cave entrances across the state, the annual death toll had fallen to fewer than 5. That decline did not happen by accident, and it did not happen through secrecy. It happened through an organization publishing exactly what killed people and teaching divers not to repeat it. What does exist elsewhere in Florida is a much clearer institutional record of how the state responds when a cave stops being a private curiosity and starts being a public risk. Two comparisons make the pattern visible. The first is West Skiles Peacock Springs, a Florida state park roughly 100 miles east of Marianna. In 1975, the same Sheck Exley who left his bottle in hole in the wall discovered a section of collapsed tunnel there that divers still call the crypt, named for the skeletal remains of a large turtle he found wedged inside it. Today, Peacock Springs is run directly by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. Every diver has to show proof of cave certification before entering the water, sign a logbook, and stay within clearly marked, government-designated routes. What was once one man's discovery, made alone, with a slate and a compass, is now a permitted, monitored, state-managed site with rules posted at the trailhead. The park is named today for Wes Skiles, another Florida cave diver and underwater filmmaker who spent much of his career documenting exactly the kind of hidden geography this story is about, before he died diving off the coast of Boynton Beach in 2010. The state did not close Peacock Springs. It absorbed it, mapped it into its own bureaucracy, and made the discovery a managed public resource instead of a private secret. The second is Eagle's Nest, a sinkhole near Weeki Wachee, several hours south, often called the Mount Everest of cave diving for its depth and the length of its passages. After a string of drownings there, including a father and his 15-year-old son on Christmas Day in 2013, the state closed the site to divers entirely between 1999 and 2003. It reopened only with mandatory registration and a sign at the entrance, illustrated with a sketch of the Grim Reaper, warning that more than 300 divers have died in caves like it. Families of the dead pushed for the site to be closed for good. State wildlife officials said no. The gated wildlife management area that exists today, with logged and restricted access, is the compromise the state settled on instead. A sign posted at the water's edge still carries a hand-drawn image of the Grim Reaper, telling anyone who reads it, in blunt terms, to turn back now rather than risk what lies below. It is the closest thing Florida has to an official monument built for a cave, and it exists because people died, not because anyone found something the state wanted kept quiet. Set beside those two, hole in the wall looks different. There is no ranger station at Merritt's Mill Pond, no posted permit requirement, no fence around the dock behind which the entrance sits. Nothing in the public record indicates the state ever moved to seal or restrict access to the trash room, specifically after Frei found it. What decides who reaches that chamber today is years of specialized training, the cost and danger of the equipment required, and the fact that almost no one beyond a small community of certified technical divers has any reason to go looking for it at all. That is a quieter form of control than a fence, but a real one all the same, and it raises a harder question than either of the state's more visible closures answer. When the barrier to a discovery is competence rather than a locked gate, who decides what the rest of us are allowed to know is down there? Return now to the chamber itself. 100 feet under Merritt's mill pond, past a chimney that plays tricks with the current, beyond the point where daylight has ever reached, is a room with no official name outside the small community of divers who use it as a landmark. In it, broken glass, rusted metal, blackened wood, the ordinary refuse of a life lived on the surface, resting on a cave floor that took thousands of years of dissolving limestone to form. Above it, today, nothing. No sinkhole, no depression in the pasture or the golf course, no scar in the ground that a surveyor would flag as anything other than ordinary panhandle farmland. Whatever opening once let that trash fall 100 feet into the dark has closed over so completely that the surface world has no memory it was ever there. Sheck Exley's champagne bottle still sits nearly a mile into the same system, exactly where he left it 3 decades ago, the one clearly dated, clearly authored object anyone has ever placed that deep in hole in the wall. Marius Frei's chamber, roughly 20 years later, holds objects nobody placed on purpose, that nobody can date, that nobody chose to leave behind. One is a monument, the other is an accident nobody has explained. Between them runs a stretch of surveyed passage, more than 4 miles of it, mapped by people who put their names next to their work and are still, as far as the public record shows, extending it. Think about what it takes for a hole in the ground to disappear that completely. There is no explosion in this story, no bulldozer, no single dramatic afternoon that anyone could point to. It closes slowly, the way every sinkhole in this part of Florida eventually closes, soil sliding in from the edges, roots and grass taking hold over the top of it, one rainy season at a time, until a hunter walking that same pasture today would have no reason to think anything had ever been there at all. Whoever dropped that first bottle, that first piece of scrap metal, into the dark 100 years ago, or 200, was standing on solid ground, doing something as ordinary as throwing something away. They almost certainly never knew where it landed. They had no reason to. What the trash room asks for, taken seriously, is smaller than a hidden order from an agency, and harder to satisfy. It asks for an honest accounting of a hole in the ground that used to exist somewhere above one specific room, 100 feet down, inside a cave outside a small city in the Florida Panhandle, and does not exist anymore. As far as anyone has shown, nobody sealed it on purpose. It simply closed, the way sinkholes do, filled by rain and soil and the passing of enough years that no one left alive remembers exactly where it was. Somewhere above Merritt's mill pond, under a pasture or a fairway that looks like every other stretch of grass in Jackson County, is the missing half of a story the cave itself has already told. Every diver who has ever finned past that room, from Frei who named it, to Neto who extended the lines around it, to the divers who will go back down next season with better lights and better maps, has looked up into that same low ceiling and wondered the same thing, where the opening used to be, and how something so ordinary managed to close so completely that the surface above forgot it was ever there. The ground closed the door on its own. It never handed anyone the key, and no one has yet found where it used to hang. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.